twist and turn my mind until I don't know who I am. Mirror man.
Good morning and welcome to a rather special AOP. It is another big interview and I am joined by none other than the majestic Simon Miller. How are you, Simon?
Oh, I'm good, man. I don't think I've ever been described as majestic before. So now I'm pumped and I'm ready. No, genuinely, Johnny, thank you for having me on, dude. When you reached out, I was like, just said to you, I absolutely want to do this. So my man, I appreciate it.
And you, Simon, are from the world of wrestling as well. And the fact that you've never been referred to as majestic says that these commentators are sleeping. They're not doing their job well. You know what I mean? I'm Jim Ross, JR. He'd be rolling right now if he heard that no one's called you majestic. So we've got, I'm so excited about having you on as a guest, partly because, as I was just talking to you before we went on air, I have been watching the McMahon documentary and it's been bringing back a lot of memories of when I used to watch WWE back in the day. But also, you are a massive Arsenal fan. Is that right, Simon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, somehow we'll get into it, I'm sure, how we kind of met these two worlds coming together somehow. But no, it was true. I mean, around the same time I got into wrestling was the same time I got into Arsenal. They just kind of sort of hit me at the same time. So, you know, these days I make a lot of content about wrestling for myself and a channel called What Culture Wrestling. But then because I always sneak in Arsenal references, all of a sudden people are like, oh my gosh, he's a Gunner too. So it all just merged at the same time. So, yeah, it's almost like wrestling is the foundation, but it's opened up the doors for all these other amazing things as well.
That's amazing. And the fact that, you know, your love for your involvement in wrestling and Arsenal came at the same time. Did you get involved in wrestling and Arsenal when you saw Mustafi making countless errors and you thought, I need to stop power bombing people? And then you thought these worlds can come together. Is that the era when you were brought to Arsenal?
I love it. I love that we've gone Mustafi. He's the first person that we've dropped. You could throw a Bentner in there. I always wanted Bentner to be so good. I was always desperate for it because look, again, I don't want to be too facetious here. He was a bit pro wrestling, right? Because he had the bravado and he had the confidence, but he had no game. He had no game whatsoever, apart from the odd goal here and there, where Wenger would always be like, this is it, guys. Don't worry. He's got his goal. And now he's like married a Norwegian princess or something. Man, he's like the craziest guy ever. But
100%.
It was long before Mustafi. It was when our back four were rock solid, and I had nothing but confidence in the back four. And I was like, they're going to be totally fine. Everything is okay.
Amazing. Well, we will get into your Arsenal origin story in a bit, but before we get into the rest of the pod, there is something that we have as a bit of a tradition on this pod, and we've got to start with, where is it? With this.
Hottest of takes.
Hottest of takes. The hottest of takes.
The AOP, hottest of takes. Make it spicy.
Yes, it's an AOP, and there's only one way to get it really cooking. Simon Miller, start us off with your hottest of takes.
Right, so I've got two, just because I do have one hot take that I say all the time. Obviously, we're all in Arsenal groups, and they're sick of me saying this, but I say it all the time, especially when things aren't going well. It becomes my default panic button. But it's because I believe it deep down, and maybe it actually would have helped at the weekend. I'm sure we'll get into it. But my hot take, as boring as obvious as it is, I think we need to go out and buy a born and bred, out and out number 9. We need a proper striker. Listen, Havertz is brilliant. I think we can all successfully say that Arteta was right and he's proven everybody wrong. But there are some times in games where, especially because, you know, we sold a lot of people in the summer as well that could sort of play that role, like Eddie went and stuff. So I just think you need someone. I always look at it like for like, right? And Liverpool, Salah is that guy, even though he's not really a traditional striker. Don't care. He gets goals and goals and goals. We all know the deal with Haaland. Chelsea have about 47 different strikers. I don't know. I can't keep up with their squad. And I just think there are some games, maybe even like the Bournemouth defeat, which was last week as we're talking. I just think it would have given us an extra option when we go down to 10 men. And it's like, you know what? We take off whoever, don't care, CDM. We can throw on our big, burly, going to smash you around striker, and we can just lump balls to him. The best thing I love about Arteta is, of course, he wants to play football, as they say, but he will change on a whim, right? He will, what does this game need? And when we don't have that option, sometimes I'm like, oh, we need it, because especially he doesn't have to start, whoever it is, doesn't have to start every game. Even if we went to get Isak from Newcastle, I think Arteta's genius, which actually kind of ties into my second hot take, is his amazing mind games, where like he doesn't even call it substitutions, right? He's got another bizarre name for it. Because sure, there's a first 11, but there isn't there's more than one first 11, basically. Like it chops and changes. So everybody is a starter in his eyes. And so I think you could actually have someone that would accept, okay, sometimes I'm not going to be a natural starter, and that's fine. Which again ties into my second hot take. Arteta needs to do more of his crazy mind games. Like there was that rumor in the summer that apparently he hired a pickpocket at the preseason dinner. I don't know how true that is, but I think Arteta needs to do more of this crazy stuff, like playing You'll Never Walk Alone before we go to take on Liverpool. I love this stuff because the coolest thing about it is I totally believe that he will win us the Premier League. Like I have supreme confidence in that. But it's football. You never know. If he doesn't, he's going to walk a very fine line. He's either going to become a genius for all this nut stuff, or if he doesn't win anything, he'll just bonkers. People will be like, he's just some crazy, eccentric manager that did all these things. So I think he needs to do more of he needs to start saying all of his bizarre stuff and doing magic tricks and pulling rabbits out of hats and saying, see, I'm teaching you a lesson here. Now, we talked about it too. The fact that even we fans, he will say, so-and-so is definitely not playing. And we're like, I don't know if he's telling me the truth or not, because he tricks you all the time. So get a striker, more mind games, and I think we'll be set. I'm very excited about this.
Oh, I love it. Absolute red hot and roasting. I mean, the fact is the debate around the striker, there is no kind of right or wrong. I fall slightly more on the side that Kai is the striker. I mean, for me, I've seen enough from him, and I think that we haven't always given him the best opportunity to just run right, and I think he's growing into that role where he will start to be more consistent. I'm pleased you put a name to that potential striker coming in the form of Isak, because it sounded like you were suggesting bringing Duncan Ferguson out of retirement, big burly striker to go up there and just lump the ball out. You know, fair enough. We'll see what Big Dunk can do. But no, and the mind games listed, I'm here for it. I love that. You know, the pickpocket is just still when Arteta goes full Fagin, you know that we're onto something there, aren't we? We're on the way up. So right. Simon, this has started off great. I love it. It is a hot episode. But now, for some of the people that might not kind of have heard of you before, let's go into kind of your journey. Obviously, you are and have been a pro wrestler and someone who has worked in and around pro wrestling. And obviously now you have your YouTube channel and writing about wrestling as an industry, as well as your acting, your and comedy as well, was something I saw in there. So love to see that. Can you just tell us about your journey into wrestling, how it started out, and all the other things that you do now as an all-round entertainer, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I was super young, 5, 6 years old. I was very lucky in the sense that the industry my dad worked in, we got Sky when Sky became this new thing. He had to have it as part of his job. Like he needed to, I don't know, do research or whatever. So all of a sudden we went from 4 channels, or whatever it was, maybe 5, maybe Channel 5 was launched by then, to like 120 channels. So your mind was blown. And one day I was just flicking through and I just saw wrestling. And it was Bret the Hitman Hart putting the sharpshooter on someone. And it was like a bulb going off. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I couldn't tell you why. And then you had the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, which was, you know, anyone that experienced that, if you were the right age, it was like watching, this was like new Father Christmas. It's like, this guy's the greatest person I've ever seen in my life. And so from that point on, I followed the traditional wrestling journey, which is you watch it until you go to university. Then you can't watch at university because, you know, cable TV, as it's probably called, is too expensive. And then somehow when you come out of university, you don't have much to do because you're trying to find a job and you just fall back into wrestling. And by that point, you know how it works. You know about all the sports entertainment and the storylines, and you learn about the backstage skits, and somehow those stories are more interesting than the ones in the ring. And that's it. You're hooked for life after that. So, I mean, I really got into YouTube quite early on. Like I was a big YouTube guy before even the likes of mean, if people are into video game, the person that I always see is the sort of the launcher of YouTube was PewDiePie, you know, a big video game YouTuber. He was the first person, obviously the first person to get to 100 million subs and sort of change the game. I was looking at YouTube before he was even, you know, a thing, because I just stumbled across it one day and I was like, wow, we can just just video ourselves and put it on the internet. So I was doing a lot of it with video games at the time, because that's the industry I was working within. I was reviewing games, because when I left university, I decided I wanted to be a child for the rest of my life. So I was like, I will review video games. And after a while, that sort of developed into a nice career, I suppose would be the right word. But I really flipping loved wrestling. And then one day I was kind of like, I'd been doing it for about 5 years, the video game stuff. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could do this for pro wrestling. I mean, it kind of, you know, there's a niche audience, but it's a big audience, and they're a passionate audience, and it's a very opinionated audience. So yeah, I just started doing it, and I started to review all the shows that were on, like WWE Raw and SmackDown. And just the way that I'm built, I was like, I don't really think that I should be reviewing wrestling matches without trying to be a wrestler. As I think you need to see it from like an internal point of view. And also, I tried to train to be a wrestler a couple of times, but it's not a fun story. Life just got in the way, and I wasn't able to keep doing it. So this time I was like, oh, well, now I can make it a part of my job. So I was reviewing wrestling, and I was also documenting on YouTube becoming a wrestler. And then it all of a sudden kind of blew up at once. Like, it was just one of those things where you're like, right place, right time. And then I had my debut. That had some traction because I've been making all these videos. And they're like, the YouTuber guy is now going to be a wrestler. Well, that's fascinating. And I enjoyed it so much. I was like, well, I'm not going to stop doing this. And that was sort of 10 years ago, whatever it was. And so I now have this wonderful balance where I get to talk about wrestling at a top level. On an independent level, I get to do it myself. I travel here, there, and everywhere. And yeah, it's just been a real sort of super fun time that I feel very privileged that I got to be able to do, especially because within that, other opportunities pop out, because as you soon learn, even if it's on a superficial level, everyone loves wrestling. Everybody has a wrestling story. Everybody has a favorite wrestler. So yeah, and nowadays, that's literally what I do. It's like wrestling threw up on me. I get to make the content, I get to do it, and then exactly. I think you just hit the nail on the head. I always like to sort of test myself. So after the pandemic, I got into acting. So I sort of do as many opportunities as those I can get on. And yeah, I've done a few stand-up shows as well. But I always have to asterisk that, because I've always done it in front of a wrestling crowd. So I've done wrestling stand-up comedy. That's not real stand-up comedy. They're there to hear wrestling jokes. You tell a wrestling joke and everybody feels like, oh, we're in the group. Whereas if I went and did that in front of a random audience, they would boo me off stage. They'd be like, what are you talking about? This is crap. But I'm very appreciative for the people that have come along. Yeah.
I quite like that idea of wrestling stand-up comedy. If a gig ever doesn't go well for me, maybe next time I have to, you know, hit a flying elbow off the stage. You know what I mean? Start mauling the crowd. But yeah, that'll add a bit of spice to it. This is as a really fascinating story. Your journey is really interesting into. I love how, like, you know, one of the things that YouTube, social media has done is it has democratized the opportunity. It's taken down a lot of those walls that previously would have been there, and removed the need for gatekeepers in a lot of ways, where it is just one person's whim, and suddenly you found your audience. But you spoke specifically about the fact that everyone loves wrestling, everyone has a favorite wrestler. Let's talk about your favorite wrestler. And I mean, you might have said that already, but who is your favorite wrestler? And do you have a favorite iconic match? And if you want to bundle this question up into who you would most like to wrestle, like if you had an opportunity, a dream match yourself to wrestle against, who would it be? Who's your favorite?
This works really well because it does all combine into one, and we have mentioned it. So it has to be Bret Hart, because again, he was my first guy. And that's when I just totally believed. I totally believed in what I was seeing. So when he lost, I lost. Like I was heartbroken. And then, you know, by the time that he had gone, it was when Stone Cold Steve Austin took off, and that took away the pain. Like, oh my gosh, Bret's gone. I can't believe it. But Austin became such a big deal. But sort of one of the last things that happened before they went their separate ways was the WrestleMania 13 Bret Hart versus Steve Austin submission match, which is my favorite match of all time. Like, it's a work of art, because within that match, Bret Hart goes from being the bad guy, so the good guy, to the bad guy. Austin goes from being the bad guy to the good guy. You also have Ken Shamrock as a special guest referee, who's like the UFC legend. So you're like, why is Ken Shamrock there? And yeah, it would be either of those two guys. Like if a Magic Genie came in here now and said you could have a match against anybody from any part of time, it would be I'd do a triple threat match. We could do a three-way, but I would take one of those guys. But yeah, I mean, they really did sort of late night with 97. Really, they just cemented my love for what pro wrestling is, especially because they were such different characters. Like Bret Hart was very much, you know, I'm a good guy with good morals. Where Stone Cold Steve Austin was, now I'm going to flip you off and drop you with a stunner, no matter who you are, or even if you're meant to be my friend. But maybe that's why it worked so well, because you got the polarizing extremes. You got, you know, very stereotypical, I'm a good guy, I'm going to do the right thing. And then you got anti-hero, again, drinking beer, swearing at people, anti-authority. And I was like, well, this is cool. And I probably got me into loads of trouble at school. I don't remember now, but I'm sure. Actually, no, I did. It's so bad. I went to a wrestling show once and I bought a Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirt, and it was the skeleton that he used to use, but he was flipping the bird. And I thought I'd go to school wearing this. Surprise, surprise, I got suspended instantly.
Yeah.
My mum was mortified. She's like, I think I must have been wearing a jumper. She was like, one, where did you buy that? And two, why did you wear it to school? But it was just a skeleton flipping people off. I must have been 13 years old. So that's terrible. But
it's all the rage back in the day. Everyone was in Stone Cold. I mean, he was a rebel without a cause that everyone bought into. Sure. You actually draw on a point. I've actually made this on a previous pod, but I find this aspect really interesting. So when you were talking about like the good guys and bad guys, and then that McMahon documentary is quite interesting about, you know, they, you know, spell it out for you, and the good guys being the baby face and the bad guys being the heel. What similarities do you think could you draw between wrestling and football, and the fact that, you know, that those archetypes of the good guys and bad guys, even though sports like football are, they're a little different to sports entertainment, which we'll get onto in a second, but still those notions of feeling like, you know, with Arsenal, we feel like we're a club of class and justice almost against the big bad City with, you know, the stuff going on off the field. What similarities can you draw between the two fields, and are there, you know, major differences obviously as well on the same note?
Well, I've talked about this before. I think the thing I always just go back to currently was Messi and Ronaldo, because they do fit into those archetypes, whatever the right word would be, because they are both supreme, like forever players. You know what I mean? No one is ever going to say they're not some of the best of all time. But when you talk to people about it, you rarely get someone that's like, oh, I enjoy both of them. No. You draw a line in the sand. You're a Messi guy, you're a Ronaldo guy. That's what people do with wrestling. You know, even when the WWE, for example, is presenting someone as a good guy or as a bad guy, sometimes the crowd will be like, no, I don't care how you're presenting them to me. I like them, or I don't like them. And I will actively voice my opinion, because that's my job, to come to a show and cheer and boo who I want. And you see it with Messi and Ronaldo all the time. And then you even get into the, you know, people break down their mindsets. It's like, oh, Messi was born with greater talent than Ronaldo. Yes, but Ronaldo worked for it. And you're like, this is a crazy sort of statistical journey that we're going down, as opposed to Messi brilliant, Ronaldo brilliant. You sort of, you know, lit up La Liga for years and now doing their own thing in America and Saudi Arabia. And I mean, that is pro wrestling, and it happens with every single team. Like even within some people's teams, you have someone that to the outside world feels like a villain. I feel very much like a lot of people get so mad at Arteta. They just don't like him, whereas Arsenal fans obviously would defend him to the core. And I think Alex Ferguson was a lot like that at United as well. If you were a United fan, you loved it. Everyone else, they couldn't stand the man. And again, that's pro wrestling. It's, even though the emotions that are coming out are very natural to the human being, but the reason I mention those names as well, though, is because you don't get it with everybody. Like, I can't think of a manager now. Maybe like a Harry Redknapp, right? Harry Redknapp was kind of just sort of, everyone seemed to just like Harry Redknapp. It's like, yeah, he's okay. He's fine. He's a very good manager. But he didn't have that polarizing opinion that some people do. I guess given that we're recording this on Friday, 25th of October, what has Jose Mourinho just done? Jose Mourinho done this week? He's wound everybody up. And some people are like, this is hilarious. I love him. And some people are like, what? Why do we let him continue to get away with this? And I'm 99% sure he got himself sent off on purpose in that United game, because he wants to be the main event. He wants to be the attraction. Once again, it's pure pro wrestling. And even Muhammad Ali said, you know, he got his promo style from watching pro wrestlers and being like, oh man, I should just start talking over the top flamboyant way. So I do think it bleeds down. Even if people don't realize it, I think it's there. And I love it. Like, I'm a huge fan of Jose. I think he's hilarious. He's very annoying, but I think he's brilliant.
I find this stuff fascinating. Your example there about Ronaldo and Messi was so on point. I think that's a brilliant example. And in the wrestling world, you went in the managerial world, you went half the way. Mourinho certainly. I think Guardiola was his foil for a lot of it, because Guardiola seemed to be, you know, more respectful. He was more humble and yet completely brilliant. And when that was Barcelona, Madrid, that, you know, that really played out. And
so true.
One of the reasons why I find this so fascinating, some people, the way they view football, and yet the way that we consume it, and this will get onto my next question, is that they think because it's ultimately real, it's a battle of athleticism and a game that plays out, they don't appreciate how much of this is down to performance. They are performers, and there is, you know, just because someone is, you know, someone could be a nerdy kind of tactician who doesn't really say much. That's a character. That's a character that you buy into. They might be in their cells, but it's still a character, because without that, without those hooks, football would just be, you know what I mean? You might as well just see little dots moving around on a screen like Champ Manager. But these are the stories. This is the theatre that we get attached to. So with regards to that, it brings me on to the next question. In terms of the comparison with football, you know, and other sports for that matter, like real sports in quotations, as opposed to wrestling. Wrestling often gets, you know, the short shrift because it, you know, isn't, or it's sport. I don't know how you would phrase it.
Predetermined is the word that people usually use.
Predetermined. There you go. Predetermined. And despite what some people would say with Pogmo's influence, you know, football is not that. And so, how do you do you think that ultimately it even matters to the audience that it might be predetermined, because of all those things we said about the fact that ultimately there are still characters and there are still narratives that play out, and you don't know who's going to win beforehand. So ultimately, whether it's down to athleticism, you know, and mastery of the game, winning the day, or a storyline that plays out, you as the viewer still buy into storylines and characters and enjoy it the same. How do you compare the audience viewership in both situations?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, I really, really do. Like, the fans don't know the outcome, right? And that's what people, the naysayers, I shall say, forget. Oh yeah, but it's all fake. It's like, yeah, to the wrestlers, but a fan can go out there and completely suspend their disbelief, because they can go, well, I don't know who's going to win. So again, I'll pick my favorite and I'll cheer for them. Sometimes it's obvious, but that's like saying, you know, when Man City play Southampton, Man City should win. Sometimes you can actually switch it up and, you know, Southampton, when you're like, well, how the hell did that happen? But it just does. But it's the stories. That's what really sort of differentiates wrestling, in the sense that, you know, if you have a build and a feud and people have cut promos on each other, when you get into the ring, if you have done your job, you should have the crowd going, well, I don't know which way this is going to go. And then, you know, it's not the moves that you do, but it's when you do them and how you do them, to sort of take them on a journey when they're like, oh, he's going to win, he didn't win. Oh, he's going to win. Which is basically like, again, City score, Southampton score, City score, Southampton. It's 2-2, but there's only 5 minutes left. That's what you can do in professional wrestling, for sure. And it's, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. If you're a true master of the craft, you go out there with a plan, but when you realize the fans aren't biting, you change it. You know, you literally talk in the ring and you say, man, we need to do this. The fans want something different. And, you know, sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. But when it does, you can talk to people and they'll be like, I totally bought into it. I totally believed it was real. And, you know, you see it even to this day. It's rare to find someone that doesn't know what the truth about pro wrestling is. But, you know, the heel turn, which is sort of a famous thing in professional wrestling, where a good guy goes bad guy, if you time that right And if you are able to plant the seeds in the right way, people will still react like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Like I had an independent show. When was it? It was UPW. It was like about a month ago where I actually did that. I did a big heel turn. And this is in front of, you know, a regular audience. There's some kids there. They probably don't know, but most are, you know, they are consenting adults who have come there for a good time. That genuine, I felt it in the room. It was actual shock. They could not believe this had happened. I guess because we had done our jobs as professionals. So yeah, it's like Aguero scoring in the last minute. Like it creates an adrenaline rush, and that's what you're able to do in wrestling. The benefit being you're in complete control of what the narrative is going to be. And sometimes you tell a good story, and sometimes you don't tell a good story, and you have to kind of pivot. But it is the same. And I think actually what most wrestling should do is look at sports and go, well, how did they achieve that reaction? Steal it, and we will literally script this out. So that's how it goes. And it does work. I've seen it work. I've been part of it. I've seen it as a fan. You know, people buy into characters, like you said, the way that people buy into Ronaldo, a Messi, a Pepper Ferguson. You know, they get behind them, they root with them. And if you truly can suspend your disbelief that when they do win, you cheer because you're happy. And that's what sports is just entertainment, right? And it's exactly the same for wrestling.
I completely agree. We're going to move on to your athletic side, but just a final point on that. Like, what people don't, again, to double down on what I was saying, if this game was played by robots, you would not look at it and go, wow, look at that amazing curler that he's just pinged into the top corner. You'd be like, yeah, but he's a robot. Who cares? It's the people. It's the fact that Saka came through an academy and he's doing it, and then you can laugh at your neighbours who. That's the thing, and I think some people lose track of that sometimes. So it's really important. Let's move on. You not only are a commentator in the world of wrestling and professional wrestling and giving your thoughts, but you also are someone who is a wrestler himself. And to do that, you obviously have to be a high-level athlete yourself. And I just wanted to get your views. Obviously, one of the hottest subjects, unfortunately, at the moment with regards to Arsenal is the spate of injuries that we are picking up. Yeah. So from your perspective as someone who is, a high-end athlete himself, do you feel like, how much would you say that it contributes to picking up injuries through, overtraining or overplaying in games? Or do you think that sometimes it's just a case of, bad luck or whatnot? Or do you, as I say, do you think that being overly trained can be something that makes you predisposed to picking up injuries the way that we have?
Yeah, I really do. I really think there is something to that. I mean, I think it's hard in football because there's so much money, and very sadly, that does dictate a lot of it. Like if all of a sudden you were going to sort of half the calendar, then that's going to have an effect on the sort of the financial side. But yeah, in wrestling, for example, the best way I can always tell people is that, obviously I've been going to the gym for years, big weightlifting guy. But after a couple of years in wrestling, I stopped doing compound movements, so deadlifts, bench press, squats, because I was like, it's too much pressure on my joints. And because you get into the ring and your elbows are getting smashed on the floor and your knees are getting smashed on the floor and your lower back takes a beating because that's where you're falling half the time, I was like, you're going to have to change up your training. Otherwise, you're not going to have longevity doing this. So you really do have to be smart with it. You really do have to approach it like you say, even though what we're doing is in tandem with each other. We're still throwing each other around. You're still slamming each other on the floor. You still need a gas tank. You still need cardio. After 8 minutes in a ring, lots of guys, myself included, are blowing because it's hard work. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. So you absolutely have to make sure that you're in the right kind of condition for it. And even just this year, I've started getting massively into cold therapy, so ice baths and cold showers and, doing all that kind of stuff because you read the science and it helps. And yoga's, amazing as well because it makes it sort of limbers up your joints. So yeah, I think you have to approach it, even at an independent level, you have to approach it like a professional because, again, your body is taking such a beating. And I know I've done it. It's not a good idea. And I understand football's totally different, especially given the intensity they're going to have. But I have done it where you have a match on a Friday, a match on a Saturday, a match on a Sunday, a match on a Monday. And by Tuesday, you're like, I can't. How the hell would I be able to keep this up? Because your body is just worn down and it's just beaten up. Even if what you're doing is so-called, again, maybe just doing exhibition matches, we'll call them, where you can kind of get away with less because the fans are just happy for you to do whatever. It still takes such an impact on your body that you absolutely always, you've got to have the right diet. Again, you've got to make sure you're getting your cardio training in. So, yeah, and I've been injured loads. I think the way it's usually described with wrestling is you can't work injured, but you usually work hurt because something. I guess football players say the same, right? No one's ever 100%. You're always kind of around 90%, and you're happy with that. And it's the same with wrestling. So you really do have to take care of yourself. And I think that's another reason why when you do get sort of the negatives, oh, it's all fake and it's all just a bunch of nothing, and you've got someone being like, dude, I'm in so much pain. I'm in so much pain right now. It's like I think that's why they get annoyed, because yeah, you wouldn't say that to another sportsman. So why do you say it to a wrestler? And again, if you're up at WWE level, I can only imagine the kind of strain is the same as a football player or professional rugby player or whatever, in a different way, of course. But those guys are doing it on a big stage. They can't phone it in ever, because it's going to get caught on camera and you're going to get criticized for it. So yeah, there is similarities for sure.
I think that is fascinating. I mean, even on the documentary I was talking about, you know, I don't know whether it was Hulk Hogan. Not a huge fan of that guy, by the way, but
no, me neither.
Yeah, or a few others. But they're like, you know, ultimately, you're saying it's fake. Tell that to the 4 neck surgeries I've had. You know, countless back surgeries. The reality is it's taken a toll. So whether or not there's a predetermined winner, the need for athletic, you know, exertion is just as much as any high level sport. Sure. Really, really interesting. And yeah. So when you say that, just a quick follow up on that, you know, that you stop doing your compound. I mean, look at me listening like I know my way around the gym. You know what I mean? I do a couple of workouts in front of the TV a week. That does me. But your
all counts, man.
Yeah, well, exactly. Your compound lifts, I think you said. So at that point, how do you know that, oh, I need to start changing the way that I do this, particularly in the field that you work in, where it's not just about getting to a decent athletic level in terms of what you can do, but also you actually have to look good for the most part. You know, like aesthetically, you have to look ripped, and it can't just be like rolling around with a dad bod going, but I am strong. Honestly, I can pick up these kids or whatever. You need to look that part. So how do you know, are there exercises that you almost need to be able to, you know, regularly do to get yourself so chiseled? And then are you able to keep, you know, are you having to lose those to be able to elongate your career? Do you see what I mean with that?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. So obviously, that was a big compound movements. Again, deadlift puts so much pressure on your back because you're lifting a lot of weight off the floor from a dead position that, you know, when you are throwing your back into a mat over and over again, you're like, I don't need to. I can stick to isolation movements where you're kind of working more independent muscles. Right. I guess there's a caveat to this, because I'd already been training 10 years before I started wrestling. So I'd probably, the way it's usually described as, you've built your base. So you've kind of built your body up to a certain point where now you can kind of just sort of, you know, hang up pictures. If you were building a house, you built your foundations. And the best way to do that is with compound movement. So if somebody was going to get into wrestling and training tomorrow, you probably do need to do both, because otherwise you're just going to make life so much harder for yourself. But yeah, it was just that. And it's just when you do squats, even if you do the perfect squat, of course, there's pressure on your knees, because you're putting a lot of heavy weight on your back and you're going down. Same with bench press. You're going to put all that stuff on your elbow, whether you want to or not. So it was just a case for me about being like, what are you trying to achieve? Well, I would like longevity in wrestling. So it was like, well, I can take all those stuff out. And again, I would say the biggest thing that I brought in was cardiovascular stuff. You know, of course, you should lift weights and you should try and sort of develop your body. But there is so much, again, you're on the floor, you're standing up, you're on the floor, you're standing up. It's HIIT routines is what it is. It's just, you know, you go crazy for a minute and then you lay down after you get hit by a move. You go crazy for a minute and you do it again. So,
I know my way around a HIIT routine. Don't worry about it, Simon. Yeah, you know, if you need some expertise on that, you know, I'm ready to step in.
Well, I probably do. I hate it. I mean, I hate HIIT routines, but you got to do them, right? You got to do them, and they always make you cry. But then you get in the ring, you're like, oh, it worked. So, yeah, it's definitely that sort of approach. I think you absolutely have to train for the aesthetic, but you have to train for the athleticism as well. You have to have that combo, which I guess is another reason why it can be quite difficult. It's the difficult balance to kind of achieve.
No, absolutely. And to be honest, I might have oversold myself, but not high intensity training for me. I'm more medium I'm probably mid training. So, but there you go. Let's move on to the Arsenal. You are an Arsenal fan. Talk to me about how it all started. What's your Arsenal origin story? You alluded to a little bit how it synchronized up with your journey into wrestling, but
yeah,
where does it all start for you? How did the love affair start? And what are your earliest memories of becoming an Arsenal fan?
So again, I'm flicking through channels, right? And wrestling is the thing. Now, this is not the best story, but I want to make out we're talking like 10 minutes maximum. I want to make that very clear. Because my dad was a big football guy, so I was already aware. He's a big Luton Town fan, so I was kind of getting into the Mick Harfords and the David Pleats. I knew all about that. But then, obviously, who was the guy of the day when I was a kid? It was Gary Lineker, right? Gary Lineker was the the shining star of the England football team. So again, for about 5-10 minutes, as I was getting into football, I was like, oh, maybe I should just go where Gary Lineker is, which of course was Tottenham. So thank goodness we didn't do that. But then I can't remember what show I was watching, but it was the same show. Who got interviewed? Ian Wright. And in much in the same way as when I saw Bret Hart, I was just captivated. My God, Ian Wright was my childhood hero. Like even more than any other wrestler. I didn't just have Arsenal shirts with Wright 8 on the back. I had the merchandise they would have in the Arsenal store. Just a big picture of Ian Wright on a t-shirt. I had all of that. I had Ian Wright mug. I had Ian Wright. I just thought, again, his personality, the way that he played football, the way that he gave interviews, he's so damn real, right, Ian, right? I loved him. There was no hoo-ha with him. And from that point on, it was like, you play for Arsenal, I'm an Arsenal fan. It really was how I got in the door. And then, again, Highbury wasn't that far away from where we live because we were we were essentially just outside of North London. So, getting to Highbury wasn't that far. So, bless my dad, he could see that I had this, love for Arsenal. Like, he wanted to get me into football because, of course, he was such a huge fan. And he took me to Tony Adams's testimonial. That's what he took me for. Now, when you go to a testimonial, you don't really have a full... It was pretty full, but it wasn't full for like a Premier League game. So we were actually quite close. And being that close and actually getting to sort of, smell the grass and all of that, there was just no going back. It was the coolest damn thing ever. And then bless my dad as well. He then booked a tour around Highbury. And, so we saw everything. And by that point, the marble halls, it was just like, there was no way. And this was sort of just before, this is when like, Bruce Rioch must have been the manager. Was it at the end of George Graham's tether? I don't think so. I think it probably was Bruce Rioch. And so it's not a great time, all things considered. It's a little bit of a rough patch. Of course, then Ian Wright stops playing because he falls out with Bruce Rioch. So I don't know what's going on. I'm not old enough to understand.
Bit of Stuart Houston thrown in there for good measure as well.
Right. Yeah. But, and then obviously I was very lucky because then Wenger comes in, he revolutionizes the club. And when you are that young and all of a sudden you're winning too, you're like, well, football's the best thing in the world. I picked this club and and from that point on, it was just everything. Like Dennis Bergkamp became almost, Dennis Bergkamp was almost like a superhero to me. Just the way that he his interviews and his presence and his odd charisma. Like he didn't have charisma like Ian Wright, but he had this silent charisma. And then at school, I started playing in goal just because nobody else would. So I would. So I just fell in love with David Seaman. And I remember I had this World Cup 94 hat. I don't know how I had that hat. I just had a World Cup 94. And I remember one day I was outside the ground and he signed it. And this was before the controversy when apparently he would just write safe hands. I got 2 Simons, safe hands, David Seaman. So that went in a frame right away. That's like, bam. And then the back four and everything. And it was just, Ian Wright was the way in. And as cheesy, as ridiculous as this sounds, though, when I learned about the club and I learned about all the players, it sounds dumb. It just felt right, though. I was like, this is my club. This is my team. Again, this is before the Premier Leagues and everything like that. And I don't know what it was. It was just something magic about the place. And again, because my dad was so kind to take me there, when you can have those real life moments and you can actually experience it in the damn place, there was no going back. There really, really wasn't. It was just, it was love at first sight in many ways.
Do you know what? I love that so much of your story there resonated with me. A lot of it was actually similar as well. My dad wasn't into football, so it was really up to me to buy my own team. And my brother, unfortunately, didn't have your sense. He liked Gary Lineker and he followed them to Tottenham. But for me, I'm exactly the same as you. I would say, if I'm honest, I was probably an Ian Wright fan before I was an Arsenal fan. He was, and I wonder, you'll never really be able to do this by way of a study, but how many Arsenal fans of our age realistically became, whether they, you come for Ian Wright, you stay for the class. Do you know what I mean?
Sure,
but on the same note, what gets you through the door? He was such a big draw. This was And it's so interesting because it links up with a lot of conversation that we've had about how much character and personality the showman behind sport became something, because I wasn't like huge into football before that. You know, we didn't even have a TV when I was really young watching it. Not like you with your Sky TV. You know, me and yeah, like we were basically like weren't viewing football the way that kids would these days. You know, and so in the early days before it became the Premier League, I think it was more, you know, and there you say, more of a working class man's, you know, a hobby and something they would follow. But then it became more of a big show, and there was a clear direction from the league, I think, to lean in more to the characters within the sport. There were characters before, but now it was front and center. Ian Wright was there, you know. There was Eric Cantona, put your collar up, you know, get your Nike adverts and stuff. And that's when it started to become a real showpiece. Once it started to maybe perhaps borrow some of the stuff from, dare I say, WF wrestling, you know what I mean?
Surprise me, man.
And then once it did, that's when I think that a lot of the younger generation really turned to football, not just because their dads told them to, because it was the coolest show in town. So really, I love that. I love that, Simon. That was great. Now, where was I going to go? Obviously, that was your Arsenal origin story. Now we're dealing with modern Arsenal, okay? And talk to me about what has impressed you the most about the revolution that has clearly been undertaken by Edu and not least the manager, Mikel Arteta. What have you seen and what has impressed you the most?
I think we kind of touched upon it earlier. It's the unity, man. Like, it's the unity between the club. And it's kind of interesting because with the Cronkies, there was that time, sort of when Arteta first came in, where it didn't feel like that unity existed at all. There was a lot of arguing about transfer budgets and what are we trying to achieve. And obviously he won that early FA Cup, and there was this kind of insinuation, well, that's you won an FA Cup. You should just be happy with that. And then all of a sudden it seemed to change overnight, right? There was an investment in the club, and Arteta very much, and Edu definitely put their personalities on it. They really, really did. Like, this is how we want it to be. And obviously coming out of the Emery days, which it was just an impossible task. No one should take a job after, well, maybe Slot has taken it after Klopp, after Ferguson, after Wenger. You don't want that job. Just have no one. Have a robot, right? Get a robot, put a robot in charge for a year, and then get somebody else in. But there really did feel like there was this disconnect. And then Arteta came in, and again, once he'd settled stuff down, you know, we had a couple of seasons where it was kind of figuring stuff out. Whereas now it does feel like, even when you go to the Emirates these days, right? It really does feel like we're into the vision, we're into the idea, we trust the process, use the catchphrases. And even when it doesn't necessarily go to plan, I mean, listen, there's always the people that go nuts. You know, after the Bournemouth result, oh, we should get rid of Arteta. It's like, we're pretty sure we've lost once in 13 games, but okay, fine. Yeah, let's get rid of him. That's just football, right? It's very tribalistic and very reactionary, but that's half the fun too. But ultimately, when you do break it down, you see what the plan is, you see what we're trying to do. And I think that's awesome. I think you need that, right? If you go through any kind of successful club that has made it to the top, once again, maybe not Jose Mourinho in his Chelsea days. I don't think that existed, but he's the outlier. You know, Klopp wins the Premier League. It feels like everybody's on board. Pep is the master at doing that, which is probably where Arteta got it from. Ferguson, again, had that. And even when Blackburn won the league in like 96, whenever it was, or 94, you know, that Kenny Dalglish team felt like we are all in this together. And the Leicester team, right, in 2016, it was the same thing. So to finally have that back, where everyone seems to be playing for this unified goal, it just allows you to enjoy it more as a fan, because you know what we're trying to do. It's not always going to work, but at least, you know, we have this idea. And I also think it allows you to like the manager more, because it kind of feels like he's one of us, as opposed to someone that's sort of sat there and pulling the strings and we don't really see where they're going. And yeah, I would say that I always love Arsenal, but maybe I've gone back to loving them more than I had done, because again, it feels like a club again, as opposed to there was those few years where, especially, I mean, even at the end of the Wenger tenure, right? There was a lot of people, get rid of him. And I hated that. I was like, man, this guy is like my fake dad. I would have been happy, even though it probably wasn't the best idea. If he was still there now, I would have just accepted it, because he brought me so much joy. I was like, dude, you do whatever you want and I will support you. But listen, that's not what happened. We did have some disarming voices. Whereas now everyone's back on track. And that's the most important thing about a club, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I was certainly one of the voices saying it's time to go, Wenger.
I get it. No, I understand it. I do understand it for sure.
Yeah, but it doesn't ever, dispel the amazing times he brought to us and whatnot. And while we are doing a little bit of a look down memory lane, but also comparing to current times, just give me an insight into who your favourite players are. I want an all-time favourite player, and then I want your favourite player from the current squad. Who really, draws it out of you and just makes you think, that's my guy?
Well, I mean, Ian Wright is my favourite player.
Right.
It just is. But I will throw in a totally random one, which is Steve Boldt, right? Steve Boldt. Steve Boldt never gets the credit, right? He never gets the credit. Like, he was such a, I think maybe because Keown kind of snuck in there at 1.2, whereas he did, but so Campbell does get the credit, but again, that's a whole conversation around Sol. Poor guy. I still feel sorry for him. Man gets murdered wherever he goes. But I always felt like Steve Boldt became, even when he was sort of Arsene Wenger's assistant, he got a bit of a whipping. I was like, poor Steve Boldt, who had a thing. But I mean, David Seaman as well. Again, they really people that I warm towards, and Henry. I mean, I'll start leaving it, but these are my guys today. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to look past Saka just because, again, been at the club so long, really cares. I love it when a player really cares. And I also love it when somebody can come back from adversity, because that whole thing that happened with England was terrible on about 10 different levels. Like, there was so much bad stuff. You're like, okay, it's bad that he missed. I never want that. To the point, anytime he takes a penalty now, he becomes my child. I'm like, just score. I don't care if we win, but please, you score. Just so that we can wrap you up in cotton wool. I'm sure he doesn't need that, but what he went through, all those players went through, was awful. But it made me sort of have a great emotional connection with him, as dumb as that sounds, because I was like, this is not right. And when you see injustice, you kind of warm towards someone. So, I mean, he really is my guy. But then there's Odegaard too, which I think we've kind of seen after he's been out injured. I think I knew, but now I think I know more. He's just the engine room, right? I mean, I guess he kind of does what De Bruyne did for City through all those years. And when he isn't there, maybe that's something we kind of need to look into going into the future. Is there someone that sort of can hold it all together as much as he does? Also, those two together is just, oh, man, I love it. I love it so much. Like, it's just, that's the kind of Arsenal that I grew up on, and it's the kind of Arsenal that I love seeing now. But yeah, I think I would go for those two. Although oddly, I mean, it doesn't work now, but he's gone. I was a huge fan of Ramsdale. I really liked Ramsdale. It was just something about, again, I think it's because he came across as so human. And there was a period when Wright came in, I was like, no, this is. Yeah. I've been totally proven wrong, and Arteta is totally proven everything right. Raya is, his record and stats speak for themselves. But I mean, even when the Southampton game, a couple of weeks ago when Ramsdale was back, the reaction he got at the Emirates, I was like, goes to show, man, people liked this guy. Like, they really, really, really did. So yeah, he absolutely was one of my guys for a while. But obviously, he's out now, so we have to move on. Yeah, for sure. But I'm a big Gabriel guy as well. Huge Gabriel guy.
That may lead into my next question, okay? Because yeah, maybe I've given away what my answer would be. If there was an Arsenal player from the current team who could be a success in the world of wrestling, would have their own character and do well. I mean, it don't have to be necessarily a good guy, even could be a really good bad guy. Who would it be? Who would be Arsenal's best wrestling candidate?
So I got two. Absolutely Gabriel, because he's a giant. Like, he's an absolute he's a giant. But also, he does have kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not the same now, but there was a while where all the love was on Saliba. I love Saliba, right? He's flipping brilliant. But it's like, why are we not talking about Gabriel either? He kind of became the forgotten man for a while. That's a great wrestling character. You never gave me the credit I deserve. But if you are talking about bad guys, because I see how other fans react to him, Ben White would be the greatest. I think, obviously, we love him. All my United friends, my Liverpool friends, my City friends, they hate Ben White. They hate his tan. They hate the fact he apparently doesn't really like football. They hate everything that went on with the England squad. They hate how relaxed he is when he plays. These are all the reasons I think he's the greatest person ever. But for some reason, Ben White has that quality where he can get under your skin which makes a great wrestling bad guy. Like it really, really does. So yeah, I think he's got a future in that. And he has the weird over the top tan too, which a lot of wrestling bad guys do. They over tan because it's an easy way to get booed.
And massive sleeve tattoos and things like that.
Exactly.
Let's be very clear about something. If Ben White was a wrestler, he, without a shadow of a doubt, would be the guy coming into the ring halfway through a match and putting a chair over people's heads. And oh my God, Ben, don't do it. Don't do it, Ben. Bang, like hundreds of
it would
heads.
be.
Smashing
Absolutely.
people with a belt. I could not agree more. That's great. So let's move to, we've got a massive game, an absolute massive game coming up this weekend. It is none other than a title rival themselves. You mentioned Arne Slot taking over at Liverpool from Klopp. So far done a very good job. I personally think that they haven't quite been tested yet. And I do think that some people are a little bit too high on Liverpool right now, and I do think they'll come back to the pack a little bit. If you think about how their season played out last year, when they looked like they were kind of getting away from us, actually came to the Emirates, lost, and then the season fell apart. That was with Klopp in charge. I don't see them as being better than that season. What have you made of Liverpool, firstly, and then talk to me about, how you see our chances ahead of this big game on the weekend?
So, yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think they've done very well. And again, you look where they are in the league, you look at the games that they've won. I think the only game they've lost against Nottingham Forest, which was at Anfield, and maybe that was an outlier. I don't know. I also think you have to give Slot credit because, again, he's taken over from Klopp. That's not easy. We've seen other legacies when people take over, and it takes a good 2 years. He kind of feels like he can be an answer for the future. But I've also watched a lot of Liverpool games, and some of their performances haven't actually been that good. Now, at the same time, they get the results. Who cares how you play if you get 3 points, right? You'd rather have the 3 points. But it does make me go, maybe he hasn't entirely figured out what he wants to do with this team yet. And, especially when they sort of, 1-0, 2-0 up, they've moved away from that Klopp style of we're now going to eviscerate you. And they do back off and they will sort of try and hold a game. Is that going to work long term? We don't know. We're 8 matches in or whatever it is. So I do think they're beatable. I don't think that they are the finished article just yet. But at the same time, I'm very worried about the weekend because of our injuries, right? I think it's a real test about where are we in the cycle right now in terms of being Premier League challengers. I think anybody, apart from the tribalistic crazy people, would admit, again, I was talking to a Liverpool fan the other day, who's a good friend of mine, and he sent me the Sky predicted team for Arsenal. And even he was like, dude, I'd be losing sleep over this team if I was you. I was like, yeah, I get it, right? There are some people in, again, it's a predicted team, but there are some people in some strange positions where you wouldn't play in a title contending almost game. But if you want to win the Premier League, you have to face adversity and you've got to figure out a way to win. Again, Saka may be in the team. We were talking about that earlier. We don't know yet. Is it mind games? Is he going to be okay? Saka is a game changer. He can win those games. Havertz is in good form. Yeah, Martinelli has been a bit hit and miss this year, but I actually thought he looked good last week. So hopefully he can carry on with that. And we do have class players that are still going to be in the team. Again, Raya is a great goalkeeper. So if he has a really good game, and, the back four can do what they've been decent at all season. I'm not saying this is a great way to win. Why can't we nick a goal and then go full dark arts and get 3 points? All I care about is winning this game. I don't care if other fans are going to get mad. I don't care if all the Liverpool players come out afterwards and go, that's not the way we play football, which I hate, by the way. It's the stupidest excuse I've ever heard. You play football to win. I don't care how you win. You play football to win. But, I was not as confident as I would have been a few weeks ago, especially California going down and stuff. It's just like, oh, man. Because I went to the Bournemouth game this year. The Southampton game this year. And it's the first time I'd sort of seen him properly live. That dude is great. He covers so much ground. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but he kind of felt like Kante to me. He's just always involved in everything, and he gets rid of the ball really quickly. Just, you take it, I'll clear up. And that's so important for any kind of a team. So, yeah, when he went down, I was like, man, that sucks so bad. But again, we have a squad for a reason, and we've got to use it. But I'll be the first to admit that, yeah, my confidence it's been knocked. I'm a little bit scared. I'm a little bit worried.
Well, we're going to move in, and I'm now going to put you on the spot. As we move into predictions, Simon Miller, there's no question this is a huge game, an absolute massive game. I mean, Paul Merson, he does clickbait a bit at times, but he's out there saying that you lose there, and you know, you play, we play. You lose there, and the league's gone. But I'm not sure I'm necessarily going there. But there's no question that he's not a million miles off, because it feels like a seminal moment, and we're in a difficult period. Where are you going with the predictions? What chances do you give Arsenal, and what score ultimately do you think it's going to be?
So I never bet against Arsenal. I just don't do it. We're fans, right? And I think you always want to go into a game being positive. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I get to the end of the year and we would have won 38 games. 38. I honestly do think we should do a Man City after we went down to 10 men. Not to start, but I think that should be the overall goal. And it should be to score. We have people in that team that can score. Even if Saka doesn't play, there's still people that can get goals. And I think we should just take the lead, and then we should be smart with it. Again, my favorite thing about Arteta is, okay, we'll play out from the back, but not if we don't have to. I think it's such a wonderful and refreshing change, and I actually think it separates him from the rest of the pack. You know, even again, a team like Southampton, I saw them do it. They kept playing out from the back. So it's not working. So why do you keep doing it? And I appreciate the fact that even though, you know, we're at the other end of the league, Arteta will be manageable with that stuff. So I'm going to go 1-0. I think I'm going to go 1-0. I think it's going to be horrible. I think the last 25 minutes is going to be a nightmare. I think in the second half, if it is either a 0-0 or a 1-0, Liverpool are going to come out and go, you know, hell for leather. But I believe we can hold on. I think it's going to feel like a 4-hour game. I'm convinced that it's going to feel extended. But I think trying to be as realistic while also living in my, you know, dream fan land, I'm gonna go 1-0. I am. But I also will say, if we come away with a draw, I won't be disappointed. I really, really won't. It's kind of worrying, because I think City are just going to win now forever, and that annoys me. But again, you've got to look at the lay of the land. So I would go 1-0 Arsenal.
That is it. I tell you what, if that prediction comes true, there'll be a lot of people very happy on Sunday evening. Now, Simon, that's the end of the pod. You have been absolutely sensational. I've loved this. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Oh yeah, dude, for sure.
Can you tell everyone where they can find you? You know, all your YouTubes, your socials, whatever, and where your work as a wrestler, even where they might come and watch you turning heel.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you search for my name on YouTube, you will find me either my own channel or What Culture Wrestling. And very depressingly, if you search for me on social media, it's Simon Miller 316. Yes, I stole the 316 from Stone Cold Steve Austin. But when I started a social media account, this was obviously many years ago, and I didn't think that I would be as involved in wrestling as I would be. If I could be, no, I would not have 316 on my name. But by the time it had already kind of taken off, I was like, oh, well, there you got me, Simon at 316. In terms of wrestling too, I mean, we'll stick it to London, because I assume a lot of people would get that too. Progress Wrestling. I'm actually there this Sunday. I will actually be wrestling when the Liverpool game is on. So I will be on my phone looking at it backstage, having a heart attack. But yeah, Progress Wrestling, I'm on most of the shows. They run monthly, and sometimes they're up in Manchester and Newcastle and Birmingham too. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I mean, again, if you keep an eye on my socials, you can see where I'm wrestling. I usually have at least one match every weekend. So if people want to come on down, I would love to see you for sure.
Amazing. Thank you again, Simon Miller. Absolutely wonderful. That has been a big interview. We will be back, obviously, on the whistle this weekend, guys. So make sure you're locked in. Everyone who's on our Patreon, over at patreon.com/The Arsenal Opinion, will be able to watch that live. Otherwise, you'll be getting the same on the Whistle podcast, but maybe at a slightly later time. Apart from that, once again, big thank you to Simon Miller. And all that's left for me to do is say ciao for now. Bye-bye.